All right, we're back, and you guys have sent over some really, really interesting legal statutes this time.
Oh, intriguing.
So today, we're going deep, deep into the world of election offenses and even counterfeit currency.
Wow, that's quite a combination.
I know, right? And all this is defined by the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita of 2023. The BNS for short.
Right, the BNS.
Yeah.
So are we basically talking about a roadmap of what not to do when it comes to elections and money matters?
Exactly.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and Chapter 9 is really where all the election offenses are laid out.
Okay.
And some of this stuff is, really surprising.
Really? Like what?
Well, did you know that even offering someone a free meal during an election could get you into some trouble?
Oh, yeah, that's what they call treating, right?
Yeah, treating.
It's specifically addressed in the BNS.
It is.
It might seem kind of harmless on the surface, but it's got these deep historical roots.
Oh, interesting.
In vote buying practices. Imagine, right, a candidate hosting this big fancy feast for potential voters. I mean, it just creates this implicit pressure, doesn't it?
Right.
It could unfairly influence their choices. That's why the BNS has this specific category, you see, to prevent even the most subtle kind of bribery.
So it's like campaigning is okay, but laying out a buffet is where you cross the line.
Exactly.
So I guess what I'm taking away from this is the BNS is really laser focused on making sure every vote is made freely, without any pressure or any sort of enticement.
Absolutely. You've got it. That's the core principle driving this entire chapter. Now, speaking of influencing voters, the BNS also tackles this tricky issue of undue influence, right?
Okay, so treating is a no-no. But what about, more obvious forms of pressure?
Yeah.
Would that fall under undue influence?
Absolutely, yeah. Undue influence is basically any action that messes with a person's right to vote freely. And it covers a whole range of behaviors, from outright threats to these more sneaky forms of coercion. For example, imagine someone using another person's religious beliefs.
Oh, wow.
Telling them it's their religious duty to vote a certain way.
Right.
That's a clear violation of their free will, isn't it?
It's disturbing to think that people would actually stoop to that level.
Oh, no.
Especially when we're talking about something as fundamental as voting.
And you know what? The BNS gets that.
Yeah.
And that's precisely why it lays out these clear guidelines.
Okay.
It's about protecting the sanctity of the whole electoral process.
Right. Yeah.
Making sure that everyone can vote without being scared or manipulated.
But how do you even draw that line,
What line?
The line between legitimate campaigning and, undue influence.
Oh, right.
What if someone just expresses their political views?
Yeah.
And encourages others to, vote accordingly.
Well, that's where it gets a bit nuanced, you see. The BNS is careful to distinguish between, simply sharing your opinion and resorting to these forceful tactics. So a candidate,
Yeah.
They can advocate for their policies, absolutely. But they can't go around threatening people or intimidating voters into supporting them. It all boils down to intent, really. Is the action designed to, crush someone's free will?
So it's this balancing act between protecting free speech, but also ensuring a fair election.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A delicate balance indeed.
What about something like, impersonating someone else to vote multiple times? Does the BNS address that at all?
Oh, absolutely it does. That's called personation,
Okay.
And it's considered a really serious offense. I mean, it strikes at the very heart of democratic elections because every vote, should represent a genuine choice of a single individual.
Right.
And personation undermines that entire principle.
So it seems like the BNS has really thought of everything to keep people from rigging the system.
Yeah.
What about the information, though?
What about it?
What's being spread during an election? Can people just make stuff up about a candidate?
Well, not quite, no. The BNS also says you can't make or publish knowingly false statements.
Okay.
About a candidate's character just to, swing the election results.
So freedom of speech has its limits, especially during an election.
I guess you could say that, yes.
But how do you even figure out what's true or false in the middle of the campaign? There's always so much back and forth,
It can definitely get tricky. And that's why the BNS emphasizes intent, you see. It's not about shutting down debate or criticism, but more about stopping those deliberate lies that are just designed to mislead voters. The focus is on maintaining that level playing field,
Right.
one based on accurate information.
So it's about being truthful and fair.
Yeah.
Even when things get competitive. What about the money side of campaigns, though? Does the BNS address that at all?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The BNS outlines penalties for, like, racking up election-related expenses without the candidate's okay.
Yeah.
It's all about transparency and accountability with that campaign money.
That makes sense. But what if someone just forgets to get authorization for a small expense? You know, like a pack of pens or something.
Right.
Does the BNS account for those situations?
Well, it actually does, yeah. It has this provision for those small expenses, anything under 10 rupees.
Okay.
That can be, like, approved by the candidate later. There's a little bit of flexibility built in there.
So it's not about being super strict, but about making sure the overall spending is transparent, right?
Precisely. And then to really drive that transparency home, there's also a penalty for not keeping good records of all election expenses.
So receipts are crucial, just like with any other financial stuff. It sounds like the BNS takes a very thorough approach, right?
It does, yeah.
To make sure elections are fair, transparent, and free from any kind of manipulation.
That's exactly the goal.
Yeah.
All these provisions are there to protect the integrity of the electoral process.
Yeah.
Which is, absolutely fundamental to a healthy democracy.
It's really eye-opening to see just how much detail goes into upholding that integrity. Now, what happens if someone breaks these rules? What are they looking at?
Well, the punishments for election offenses, they kind of vary depending on how serious the violation is.
Right.
They can range from fines to even imprisonment.
So there's a sliding scale, basically.
You got it.
Depending on the offense.
But there's this interesting exception. Remember bribery by treating?
Oh, yeah, those free meals we talked about.
Exactly. Well, that's only punishable by a fine.
Interesting. So the BNS seems to acknowledge there are different levels of seriousness when it comes to these offenses. Okay, are we ready to shift gears a little?
Sure, let's dive into the world of counterfeit currency and stamps.
Sounds intriguing. I'm ready when you are.
Okay, so Chapter 10 of the BNS, that's where it all goes down. This chapter covers everything. I mean, everything from making fake money to messing with government stamps.
Okay, before we jump into specifics, can you just clarify some key terms for us?
Sure.
When the BNS talks about coin, banknote, and counterfeiting,
right,
what are they actually referring to?
Right. Okay, so coin is basically any piece of metal used as money, officially stamped and issued by the government.
So the coins we use every day, that's a coin.
Exactly.
According to the BNS. What about banknote, though?
Right. A banknote is like a promissory note, right?
Okay.
Issued by a bank or the government that guarantees payment to whoever's holding it on demand. It's what we normally think of as paper money.
Okay, and how does the BNS actually define counterfeiting?
Well, counterfeiting is basically the act of making a copy of something with the intention to deceive, to trick people. So if you were trying to create like a replica of a 100-rupee note in your basement, that would be counterfeiting.
And I'm guessing the BNS is not a fan of that.
Not at all. Counterfeiting is a serious, serious offense.
Yeah.
You could be facing life imprisonment or up to 10 years in prison, plus a massive fine.
Wow, they don't mess around. What about actually using counterfeit currency then?
Oh, that's illegal too, of course.
Yeah.
The BNS specifically outlines penalties for importing, exporting, buying, selling, or even just using any counterfeit currency or stamps.
But what if someone uses a fake bill without knowing it's fake? Like if they got it as change at a store or something.
Well, that's where things get a little tricky, you see. The BNS has this clause, right?
Yeah.
It's the knowing or having reason to believe clause,
Yeah.
which basically means even possessing those counterfeit items without knowing could be an offense if you should have reasonably suspected they were fake.
So you can't just play dumb and get off scot-free.
Not necessarily, no. The law expects you to be aware, especially when you're dealing with money. You have a responsibility to check what you're handling.
So it's best to be careful and pay attention to the money you're getting.
Exactly. Now, another thing the BNS addresses is possession with intent.
Okay.
Just having those counterfeit items with the idea of using them as if they were real, that's a crime in itself.
So no counterfeit souvenir collections allowed?
Well, not if you're planning to pass them off as real, no. But there is an exception, though.
Oh, okay.
If you can prove you got those counterfeit items from a legitimate source,
it
might not be a crime.
So, like, if I inherited a collection of counterfeit coins from my great-grandfather who was a history buff, I might be okay.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
But you would have to prove that you acquired the collection legitimately and had no intention of using them as real money.
Right. So the BNS is concerned not just with the use of fake stuff, but also with its production.
Absolutely. Making or even just possessing the tools and materials for counterfeiting. That's a serious crime, even if you haven't actually made any fake currency yet.
It seems pretty proactive, like, don't even think about it.
Right.
But what about things that, like, resemble currency but aren't meant to be used as money?
Yeah.
What if someone made, like, a novelty bill as a joke or something?
Well, the BNS covers that too. Creating documents that look a lot like real currency notes, that's an offense as well.
Makes sense. You wouldn't want people getting confused or thinking they've got real money when they don't.
Exactly. It's about protecting that visual integrity of currency and preventing any potential for trickery.
Okay. What about government stamps?
Yeah.
Are there offenses related to those, too?
Oh, absolutely. The BNS has a whole section dedicated to offenses related to those government stamps.
Like what, for example?
Well, things like, removing or reusing stamps or erasing marks from used stamps. Basically anything that would let a stamp be used again fraudulently.
Huh. Never thought of that, but I can see how that'd be a problem.
It is, yeah. Stamps are a source of income for the government, right?
Right.
So tampering with them is like financial fraud.
Okay, so don't mess with stamps either.
Nope.
What about making fake postage stamps? Is that an offense?
You bet it is. The BNS very clearly defines and prohibits creating or using fictitious stamps.
Fictitious stamps.
Yeah, that's their legal term for fake postage stamps.
So counterfeiting isn't just about money, it's about other government stuff, too.
It is, yes. The BNS aims to protect the integrity of any item that has official value or serves a specific governmental purpose.
Makes sense. Are there any other offenses related to currency or stamps we should know about?
Yeah, there are a couple more. The BNS also talks about offenses that are specifically for employees of the mint, like, manipulating the weight or composition of coins during production.
Wow, that's a huge breach of trust.
Absolutely, yeah. When you're making currency, accuracy and integrity are the most important things.
And I imagine removing coining tools from the mint without permission is also a no-no.
You got it. That's a serious offense under the BNS.
So it sounds like the BNS really leaves no stone unturned when it comes to protecting the integrity of currency and stamps.
It doesn't, no. It's really a comprehensive legal framework designed to stop any kind of counterfeiting and keep the financial system stable.
It's amazing how many different scenarios they've accounted for. It's been fascinating to really dig into the details of these offenses. What struck you the most about all of this?
What I find really interesting is how the BNS tries to balance things. On one hand, it wants to protect the right to free and fair elections, but on the other, it sets these clear boundaries to prevent any fraud or manipulation.
It's a complicated issue, for sure. And on the currency side, it's really remarkable how the BNS anticipates and addresses all these potential ways that people might try to cheat the system.
It really is.
Yeah.
It shows just how important these issues are and the need to constantly adapt to these new challenges.
We've covered so much today.
We have.
But it feels like we've only just scratched the surface of this topic.
Yeah, there's always more to explore. I'd love to, dive deeper into the historical context of all this.
Me too. But for now, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back to discuss all the fascinating insights our listeners have sent in about how elections are actually conducted in India.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about all the ways elections can go wrong, but what about how they're supposed to work?
Right, well, that's where the Representation of the People Act of 1951 comes in.
Okay.
It's often called the RPA, and it basically lays out the whole process for running elections in India.
So if the BNS is like the don't do this guide, the RPA is the rulebook.
Exactly. It covers everything. Registering voters, counting those votes, declaring a winner. It's all in there. All about making sure there's a system, a fair one. And it all starts with the electoral roll, which is basically a list of everyone who can vote.
Ah, so that's how you stop people from voting multiple times.
Yeah.
Or people who shouldn't be voting from casting a ballot.
Exactly. Keeping that electoral roll accurate and up to date is super important for fair elections. And then you also need qualified candidates.
Right.
Which is why the RPA also outlines specific qualifications for anyone running for office.
Makes sense. What kind of qualifications? Is it just about age?
Well, age is part of it, but the RPA also has requirements for citizenship.
Okay.
And it even has rules about criminal convictions.
So not just anyone can run for office.
Right.
There are safeguards to make sure the candidates have some integrity.
Exactly. The RPA is all about upholding the integrity of the whole election process. from the candidates themselves to the way votes are cast and counted.
What about the actual voting process? What are some of the key things the RPA talks about?
Well, it goes into a lot of detail about setting up polling stations, using ballot boxes, and what the polling officers are supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's all about creating a secure environment so voters can cast their ballots without feeling intimidated or interfered with.
What about those ink marks they put on voters' fingers?
Oh, yeah.
Is that part of the RPA too?
You bet. The RPA says they have to use indelible ink to stop people from voting more than once.
Seems so simple.
I know.
But effective. What else do they do to prevent fraud when they're counting the votes?
Transparency is key. The RPA lays out a very specific process for counting the votes, and it includes having observers and representatives from different political parties there during the count.
So it's not just happening behind closed doors.
Nope. This helps make sure everything is done fairly and honestly.
Checks and balances at every step.
Exactly.
Yep.
And once the votes are all counted, the RPA outlines the procedures for declaring the results and giving certificates to the winners.
So the RPA takes you from the very beginning of the election cycle all the way to announcing the winners.
It does. It gives a complete framework for the entire process. And the goal is to make sure elections in India are free and fair.
It's incredible how much detail they put into every part of an election. From preventing bribery to keeping accurate voter lists to making sure the counting process is transparent, it really shows how powerful and important democracy is.
I agree. It shows how much work goes into upholding those democratic principles and making sure every single vote counts. But have you ever thought about the potential challenges to democracy? Particularly in a place as diverse and complex as India.
That's a really good point. Running elections is one thing, but making sure the system is fair and just is a whole other challenge.
Exactly, and that's something that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar brought up in his writings.
Okay.
He was a key figure in drafting the Indian Constitution.
He's considered the father of the Indian Constitution.
That's right. He was a brilliant legal mind and a champion for social justice, and he knew that democracy was more than just a set of rules. He warned against what he called the grammar of anarchy, where people could exploit political freedoms to undermine social harmony and justice.
The grammar of anarchy. That's powerful. So he was worried that the freedoms that come with democracy could be misused to create chaos.
Sort of, yeah. He believed that real democracy needed not only political freedom, but social and economic justice for everyone. He argued that without equality, democracy could easily turn into a system that only benefits the privileged few.
So just having elections isn't enough, according to Dr. Ambedkar.
No.
A true democracy needs a commitment to social and economic equality, too.
Exactly. He said that political freedom without social and economic justice could lead to a system that's only democratic in name.
That's a sobering thought. It makes you think about how democracy isn't just about the act of voting, but about creating a society where everyone has a real chance to participate and succeed.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
Dr. Ambedkar's perspective adds a whole new layer to how we understand the BNS and the RPA.
It reminds us that these laws aren't just about rules and regulations. They're about creating a fair and just society where everyone's rights are protected and respected.
It's about ensuring that the ideals of democracy, the ones enshrined in the Constitution, are actually experienced by every citizen.
It's been a really thought-provoking journey. We've gone from the specifics of election offenses and counterfeit currency to these bigger philosophical questions about democracy in India.
And it's fascinating how connected they are.
I know, right?
Free and fair elections, fighting counterfeiting, pursuing social and economic justice, they're all essential parts of a healthy democracy.
It's like a tapestry, woven together from laws, social values, and this constant effort to create a more equitable society. Okay, we've covered a lot today. What are your final thoughts?
I think what's most important is that people participate in an informed way, whether it's voting, understanding campaign finance rules, or even just being aware of counterfeit currency. Knowledge is power. It helps us engage in these systems responsibly.
Knowledge is power. I like that. It helps us recognize problems and find solutions to make things better. What about you? What are your key takeaways?
What really stands out to me is how important it is to look deeper. Yes, we need strong laws and rules, but we also need a real commitment to fairness, transparency, and accountability at every level of society.
That's a great point. And I think this deep dive has given our listeners a lot to think about.
I hope so. I hope it sparked some curiosity and a desire to learn more about how we can all help build a stronger, more just democracy.
That's a great note to end on. But before we do, I'm wondering, with the rise of digital currencies, how do you think the idea of counterfeiting might change in the future?
That's a fantastic question, and one that deserves its own deep dive.
I'm adding that to the list.
Yeah.
Until next time, deep divers.
Wow, this deep dive has really been something else. We've covered so much, from the specific offenses in the BNS to the bigger picture of how to build a fair and just democracy.
It really has been quite the journey. And, it's striking how interconnected all these topics actually are.
It is, yeah.
Free and fair elections, fighting counterfeiting, pushing for social and economic justice, they're all woven together. Right, like we zoomed in on the details and now we're pulling back to see it all.
Exactly.
So what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners are walking away with today?
I'd say a renewed appreciation for just how complex and important these issues are.
Yeah.
Whether it's understanding the finer points of campaign finance laws,
Right.
or recognizing the threat of counterfeit currency, or even simply grasping the importance of an informed vote. Knowledge is power.
For sure.
It lets us participate in these systems, in a thoughtful and ethical way.
I like that. It's not just about following the rules. It's about understanding why the rules are there.
Absolutely.
And the values they're supposed to protect.
Yeah, and recognizing that democracy is a process, something we always need to be working on and defending. It takes vigilance and critical thinking and, a willingness to have real discussions, even when we don't see eye to eye.
It's about finding that balance between individual rights and our responsibility to each other. We all have a part to play in keeping our institutions strong and making sure they truly serve everyone.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
It's about building a society where every voice matters, every vote counts.
Yes.
And we can all work together towards a more just and equitable future.
That's a powerful message.
It is, and I hope this deep dive has inspired our listeners to keep exploring these topics.
Me too.
And to engage with their own communities with, a deeper understanding of the complexities and challenges of democracy.
I hope it's made them a little more curious, given them a desire to learn more about how we can all contribute to a stronger and more just democracy.
Well said. Well, until next time, deep divers, stay curious and stay engaged.